stunning result.
The UK votes to leave
the EU.
After 43 years in an historic referendum.
When the UK voted to leave the European Union in 2016, some predicted it would be the beginning of the end for the EU.
It could be followed by other countries.
That it is the start of the end of the European Union as we know it.
I think there were at least 15 populist parties across Europe who advocated a referendum to leave the EU.
But since then, the EU and the way its members feel about it have changed.
The people are slightly more optimistic now. Maybe Brexit will not happen, we don't know.
Could the Brexit referendum have actually benefited the European Union? Andrea Venson is on a mission. Today, he's in Milan drumming up support for one of Europe's newest political parties. Volt Europa is a pan-European movement with political parties in 14 different countries.
I found Volt because of Brexit. Brexit was the first spark that told me that our European values were in danger. I figured that something was needed to try to steer the direction that the UK, but not only, Europe as a whole was taking. And so the idea of creating something European, a European political movement. We dream about a Europe that is more united, more cohesive, where countries are not left behind.
But Andrea has his work cut out for him. Across Europe, a third of people want to leave the EU, and Italy has the third highest rate at 44%. But he also has good reason to hope, because since 2016, optimism about the future of the European Union has grown by over 20%, and people feel more attached to the EU than before the Brexit referendum. So what's going on? Is the European Union really gaining popularity?
In some ways, I think the EU is stronger because of Brexit. Brexit makes the EU feel like safety. It makes the EU feel like the organization that protects them from the kind of chaos that ensues when you try to leave. And that really changes people's attitudes towards what Europe is doing.
Even the most Eurosceptic political parties are singing a different tune.
I can remember Marine Le Pen appearing at a press conference just after the British referendum result. On the wall behind her was a poster of two hands breaking free of shackles, and it said, "Brexit, next France."
Vive la République, vive la France!
If you look at what Marine Le Pen argues today, I think she's almost done a sort of U-turn, because what she is trying to advocate in France is not so much Brexit than a sort of reforming the EU from within.
Merci, messieurs.
It's a different sort of Euroscepticism because it's not about leaving Europe. It's about transforming Europe and trying to create a sort of Europe that she and her nationalist friends think suits their agenda better.
I think there were at least 15 populist parties across Europe as of 2016 who advocated a referendum to leave the EU or just advocated leaving the EU. Maybe one or two of them still do explicitly. It's really almost dropped off the agenda.
It looked like the Brexit vote would pose an existential threat to the EU. But it's not the first time the EU has faced serious problems since it was established, and some of the most serious ones have appeared in the past decade. In 2008, the world financial crisis led to recession in Europe. Countries like Ireland, Portugal and Greece had to be bailed out by the EU and were forced to implement austerity measures. Unemployment rates hit record highs and recessions deepened. This debt crisis was soon followed by the migrant crisis of 2015, when more than 1 million refugees and migrants streamed into Europe. Many of them were fleeing war and chaos in the Middle East. No country was hit harder by both these upheavals than Greece.
When the financial crisis hit, Greece was already borrowing quite a lot. I think its debt to GDP ratio was over 100%, and it had a very large deficit. Over the period of 8 years, GDP fell by something like 27%. That has left a lot of people much poorer than they were before.
A few years later, Greece was on the front line of the other European crisis, mass migration.
I think the EU has not quite realised what the cost Greece has been of the migrant crisis that it has had to cope with, and also not just financially, but in many ways economically, but also socially, having to cope with this. Greece, I think, has dealt with it reasonably well, given its very limited resources and given the fact that through the period of the migrants arriving in Greece, it was also having to impose very strict austerity in its own population. So it hasn't been easy, and the EU could have been considerably more helpful.
A recent poll revealed that Greeks, more so than any other European nationality, think that their interests are not taken into account by the EU. Yet Greece hasn't turned against the European Union. Since the Brexit referendum, the share of Greeks wanting to leave the EU decreased by over 20%, from almost half to just a third. Both the economic and migrant crisis in Europe have receded, and the EU has survived.
The people are slightly more optimistic now than before. So I think the Italians are trying to hope for a better future for the EU.
The founder of Volt believes there is a historic opportunity.
There are two allies in front of us. One is to make the EU a true political union. They can actually support drastic changes in our society. And the other path is the one of becoming a loose coalition of states with not much future. And I'm really going to fight strong for the first alternative. And I see plenty of young people that believe in the same values.
That ambition for true unity is always going to be difficult. The EU is made up of 28 different countries, each with its own history and interests. But what it has shown is that it has a survival instinct.
Over the past decade, every time that the EU has faced a crisis that looked like it might be an existential crisis, it's become abundantly clear that EU leaders have the political will to hold the union together. That European countries have so much at stake in the survival of this union that ultimately they do what needs to be done to hold it together. It's just that they often do that at the very last minute.
Hi, I'm Katie and I directed this film. If you'd like to find out more information, then please click the link opposite, where you'll find further Economist coverage on Brexit and some of the research, studies and data that we used in the film. If you like the film, then please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to be notified when our latest films come out. Thanks for watching, bye.